Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar. Um, what we're going to be going over today, the title of the webinar is Use Data Science to Transform Your Business and Do It for Free. So I'm going to be going over some basics of how you can either build or improve your data science / analytics team. And we're going to get started here in just a second. I think the first thing to talk about is what is data science? One of the definitions that I found about this is that it is about processes and systems to extract knowledge or insights from data in various forms. So what does that mean? Um, Looking at the next slide here, you can see, data science encompasses anything. It's a term today that talks about, anything that you do with data to, try to have an outcome, whether it be in business, science, whatever. Basically, that's what data science means. So you've seen some of these terms before. One of the older terms was data mining, which was big back in the day. Analytics, predictive modeling. One of the hot terms right now, machine learning. Um, Anything with databases, experimental design, visualization, reporting. All of this is covered by data science. And if you have a data science team or an analytics team, they would focus on a lot of these. Now, some of these are more advanced than others, and we're going to go over that in a second. But what are really some of the basic things that fundamental things many businesses already have? Reporting, pulling the data. Some don't. But those are really some of the basic things. Some of the more advanced things that we'll talk about a little bit are when you're getting into predictive modeling, forecasting, sentiment analysis, and things like that. So what kind of programs can you use for this? There are numerous programs out there. For example, SAS has been one of the standards, the industry standards for a long time. I remember using SAS back in the late 90s. And, that was pretty much the program that you used at an SPSS if you were doing any kind of data analytics. Since then, luckily, we're getting into an age now where a lot of these types of software that are out there you can get for free. And, a lot of the algorithms that are in there and methodologies that are in there are sometimes better than the paid options. So today we're going to focus on just the free software, and the two programs that we're going to focus on solely in this webinar are MySQL and R. So MySQL, is a database program where you could do data manipulation with SQL. R is a program that you could do along with data manipulation. You could do statistical methodologies. There's other programs out there today, like Python is a fantastic program, very popular. I'm sure you've heard about it. I actually have a separate webinar focused just on that. So there are many open source options that I believe are better and more cutting edge than what's out there today. And I'm not knocking any of the paid programs, but I do believe that just using something like R, you could be just as advanced as anybody else using some of these paid programs. Now, R, I believe, is a really good program. And again, there are advantages to some of the paid software as far as you're talking about performance, but all in all, you could get a lot done with free software. What we're going to cover now are the tiers of data science. And you can see there's 4 tiers here that we have defined. And starting off with the first one, data management. This one is one of the most important tiers here. You can see that we've defined it as data management, visualization, measurement, predictive analytics. Again, this is kind of covering that whole gambit that we discussed earlier. But data management is so important because really it is the foundation of analytics. Anything that you want to do with a predictive model, with segmentation, machine learning, anything is only as good as the data management and the data that you have coming in and the quality of the data. So, one thing that I'm sure you've heard is garbage in, garbage out. And, you know, truly, if your data is garbage, your analytics will be garbage, and it's not just the amount of data. Obviously, the more data that you have, the better, but it's also the quality of the data. You know, is the data that you're getting, can it actually be useful? Do you have enough information on your customers to use to create a predictive model? All of that is really essential. And being able to manipulate the data, if you've got it from different sources, different tables, different databases, can you pull it together so that you can use it? So, as we were just talking about with, pulling the data from different tables, from different sources, I think of data management in two parts. One of them is databases. So this is actually, how do you store the data, where all the tables, the databases that the data is stored in. And then querying, how do you actually pull that data? Now, with building databases themselves, we're going to show examples of how to do it in MySQL for free, just using CSV files. It's very simple to do from a basic standpoint like that of CSV files and other things. But databases can get very complex. Querying databases, again, anything that we do within New Market Revolution, we could show you how to query data easily. It's something that is definitely not that difficult. When it comes to building databases, that's something that you really do need an expert with, especially if you're going to be building complex databases. So what is a database? It's a place to store data that can be retrieved, managed, or updated. What is a relational database? A relational database versus a non-relational database is something that presents data in tables with rows and columns. And this is your traditional database that you think of, where you have the different fields on top and then you've got rows. So it could be a field of, here's sales, product category, store number in the field. And in the rows, you have the actual customer ID. So row by row, this is the customer number one spent X amount and everything like that. So it's really a matrix that you would traditionally think of. Now, non-relational databases are a lot more complex. And, when you're talking about and hearing about big data, this is one of those things where it comes in unstructured. You've got a lot of data from a lot of different sources, not totally organized. You've got some rough data from web data and things like that are kind of pulled in here. And that could get really complex. We're not going to really show anything as far as that, but just so you're aware of it, when you're hearing the term big data and when you're hearing about systems like Hadoop, they're non-relational databases, and that could get little tricky working with some of those. So creating databases, and again, as I touched on this, building a simple database, not that big of a deal if you're just doing it with the CSV file through MySQL. But if your company is really starting to work with a lot of data, and if you're working with sensitive data, it could get very, very complex. Just the amount of data that you have, this is something that I really would like to emphasize, that you could do basic things. But a database is something that I would definitely, if you need to invest, and we could help you in pointing you in the right direction for this. But if you really need to invest in one thing when it comes to analytics, I think really getting a good database administrator, someone to really develop these databases, maintain your databases, That is really important, and it's definitely worth the investment. So again, today I'm gonna show you really quickly how to do some stuff in MySQL. So MySQL is a free program that allows you to create databases. And what you can see here on the diagram on the image on the left is how to create a database, how to create tables, and then you can see the code there on the right. So this is the basics of what you're looking at here code wise is SQL, and it's really not that difficult. It looks like a lot here, but once you understand what everything means, it really makes sense. But this code here, and it's not that much code, you could see that using this has allowed us to create a database, and you can see this on the left under schemas, called retail_DB. And then within that database, we created a table called sales_TBL. So, if you go on to newmarketrevolution.com, I actually have a tutorial that shows you exactly how to do this step by step, but not really that complicated. Especially, you look at that first line of code that says create schema and then retail DB. That's all you need to create a database. Your database is created after that. And then when going and developing tables, it's just a matter of putting in the field name and declaring what type of field they actually are. Is it integer? Is it a date, character, decimal, and so on? Now here's the really important stuff. Once you have the tables, once you have the database, um, here's the fun part is, now you can start querying the data. You could start doing things like saying, hey, how many customers had an average spend of $500 or more in the last month? You know, let's group together these customers that bought this particular product. There's a lot of stuff that you could do as far as querying goes. So what is a query? A query is nothing more than a request for retrieval of data from a database. So you're basically just querying data. You're pulling it from a database, you're pulling it from a table, and then you can start manipulating that data. Now, there are different languages that allow you to do this. I would say that by far the most commonly used language is SQL. And even if you've heard of other languages that are used for querying data, odds are that they're built off of SQL. So I touched on Hadoop the other before. I was talking about Hadoop and using big data and things like that. Well, one of the languages that you could use for that is called Hive. And Hive is essentially nothing more than SQL. It's not versatile as what you would use in maybe Oracle or Teradata or some of those things, not to get too into the weeds there, but it's based off of SQL. So, I really would like to emphasize that if there is anything that you really need to learn, any language whatsoever, when it comes to data science and when it comes to analytics, I would really highly suggest SQL. SQL is so important, and there is so much that you could do with it. And it's important. Everything is built off of this, but honestly, it's not that hard to learn. It's very versatile. There's some very basic functions, very basic aspects of the language that allow you to do so much. And looking here, this may be a little overwhelming looking at some of this, but you could basically break it down to a couple different functions here, right? One of them is select. So this is one of the keywords that you would be using in your code is select, and then you have member ID, sales amount. So what we're doing is we're saying we want to see the two fields, member ID and sales amount. The next thing is you mention where you want those fields pulled from. So that's what the from keyword states there. So we're saying select member ID and sales amount from retail underscore DB. So in the prefix there, we're stating what the database name is, dot, and then sales table. So that's the table that we're pulling that resides in that database. Now you could start adding a couple more pieces of information here, and we could see, okay, well, we want to see members and sales amount where the sales amount is greater than 0. So we don't want to see anybody that had just returns like negative sales or anything like that. And we want to see it for people who have purchased after December 31st of 2015. So just for calendar year 2016. And that would then return your member ID and sales, everything greater than 0, with your date being greater than December 31st, 2015. So this is very simple. This is not that complex. And this is basically the whole foundation of SQL is based around this. Now that's pulling the data. Now there's a lot that you could do when you're talking about manipulating data. And this is where it can start to get pretty complex. So here we're saying select product category. And you can see down there from retail database dot sales table. That's the one that we're again, the database and the table that we're pulling it from. But now you could start doing things like counting. So we want to see within this, how many members are there? Well, you just put count in front of member ID. That's going to give you back the count of how many times have you seen member ID show up in here. On top of that, you could sum the sales amount. What were the total sales from this query here? Average transaction count. So how many transactions on average did we see? Your minimum transaction day would show you, what is the earliest day that is in our table here. Max would be your max transaction day. So these are just some of the things. There's a lot of other things that you could do that start to get really complex. Things like case statements, where it's almost like an if then, where you could actually create new fields and say, hey, if somebody has sales greater than $500, label them as, a prime member, something like that. You could start to get very complex when it comes to, actually joining different tables. Right now, we're just looking at one table, retail database dot sales table. But you could start doing things like left joins, right joins, inner joins, outer joins, just so many different ways that you could join these tables together. You could do unions, and this stuff gets really complex. But again, that's something that we really focus on. One of our biggest focuses with New Market Revolution is to show how to do this stuff. Because again, the key thing is, how do you get the data together that you really need to make business decisions? So what we were looking at right there was how to pull SQL in MySQL. Again, it is such a versatile language. It's, used by everybody, that, any programs that you use, like SAS, for example, has a procedure where you could pull in, it's called ProcSQL. And it basically allows you to manipulate data in SAS using the SQL language. There are other programs that do that too. Python, for example, has a package where you can manipulate the data in SQL. R has a package where you could do the exact same thing. And a lot of these have them where you could actually go right into your database through the interface of this program. So now we're getting into R, and you can see here some of the basic stuff that we have. So looking at this code here, and this is what the interface looks like for R. This is what the type of code looks like. You can see in this first line, what I'm doing is I'm pulling in a CSV file and I'm creating a data set called my data underscore one. And what I'm doing below this is now I'm using a function called SQLDF, which allows us to manipulate the data any way that we want using the SQL language. So just like what we looked at before of, select from and all that, that's what you could see in this green font down here. So we're selecting customer ID. We're summing the sales and creating a new field called total sales from this data set that we just pulled in called my data one. And you can see again, we've got all this criteria in there of where transaction date is between January 1st, 2016 and January 31st, 2016. Grouped by customer ID. That's how we're going to group all the data. So there's a lot that you could do here. But on top of this, even if you didn't want to just pull a file in, there's other packages that allow you, again, to go right into our database. So this database that we created in MySQL, we can directly access through R. That's something that we could do. Now we're going to go on to the second pillar. I know I spent a lot of time talking about data management, but again, that is just so important. Another one that is important for, basically understanding, generally speaking, what your data looks like, what trends look like. The second pillar then that we're talking about is visualization. What is visualization good for? I think it's very important for if you're getting to basic analytics of, from a general standpoint, what is going on with the business or whatever. How do our sales look? How does our profit look? How are things trending visually? Visualization is very important for presentations. It's very hard to talk to, especially if you have a lot of different numbers out there, to kind of explain to somebody what's going on if you can't do it visually. Especially when you're talking about executives, when you're talking to people at that high of a level that really don't understand the detail of the data. A lot of people kind of get overwhelmed when they look at a bunch of numbers. So it's really important to be able to, sum up something in a very simple way and show it visually so that people really understand what you're talking about. So here's some examples of visualization in R. And you can see, R is a fantastic program, right, when it comes to visualization. There are people that have created a lot of different packages for this. And there's a lot of stuff that you could do, from scatter plots, which you can see on the left there, to histograms, to just all sorts of awesome charts that are color coded, and, a lot of different matrices that you could pull in there, pie charts. And what I'm showing here is really just scratching the surface. There's a lot of stuff that you could do in R, package-wise. And a lot of stuff that you could do in Python too. Python is pretty good for this. Again, I'm not going to touch on it too much in this presentation. I've got another webinar specifically about Python. But again, same type of stuff, scatter plots, any kind of diagram here. One of them, which is pretty cool, you can see here is a word cloud. You could actually do this in R too. But if you've got text files, and you want to see what some of the more common words are, which is great when you're looking at stuff like survey data, or trying to understand what your customers think about your product or your business. Things like this are really huge to kind of visually see what pops out. So you can see here, this is actually an example of just some reviews of a particular product. And you can see what's really standing out is, what are some of the keywords that they're really talking about. Well, unfortunately, you can see that some of the words are cheap, quality, things like that. Music, songs, good, screen. Really cool. A lot of stuff that you could do with that. Now, the third pillar that we're going to talk about here is measurement. Measurement is very important. And it's, pretty much taking it one step ahead of visualization. High level measurement. It's, again, it's visual to, or is similar to visualization, because you could see how something is trending. Um, but again, it's people at a high level maybe need to see it visually. When you're actually in the weeds and you're working closely with the data, sometimes it's a lot more insightful to look at the raw data and try to pull in some simple trends of this year versus last year, week over week, month over month. And I think that that's one of the more common things that you see with businesses nowadays. From the smallest business to the biggest business, a lot of people do things of measurement of how are we trending this year versus last year. Our sales up this week over last week, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine to do that, and you need to understand what the business is. But when you really want to bring in data science to this, there really are opportunities to go beyond this, especially when you're talking about getting a lot of data. When you start having enough data to really work with, it makes sense to go beyond simple metrics of looking at this year versus last year and looking at basic trends. And there's ways to become more proactive when you're implementing campaigns. So, for example, setting up an email campaign or a display campaign, anything like that, instead of just putting it out there and seeing how this campaign did versus another campaign. Is there a way that you could set it up in a test control fashion so that you could really start to measure this statistically? So one of the key things, and again, New Market Revolution really focuses a lot on this also. One of the keys is bringing in the data, and how do you get it in the database and query it and all that. But you're talking again about the quality of the data that we have. Is that if you're just looking at week over week trends or month over month, it's going to tell you directionally what's going on. But if you really want to start to bring in data science and bring in statistics behind your campaigns, you really need to think about this from a design of experiment standpoint. And what do I mean by design of experiment? I'm talking about setting up test versus control. And granted, there are many cases where you can't do this, but there are many cases where you can use test and control. For example, one of the most common ones that people see are with websites, with doing A/B tests. Let's create this landing page and compare it to this other one. Well, that's test and control. That's using statistics to really kind of figure out what's winning out. And when you're doing this, it kind of gets rid of all the noise. It kind of holds all the variables constant. And when you're doing something like an email campaign and you've got a control group where we randomly pull out a group of people and say, okay, this group of people aren't getting the email. This group of people are. You could start to use statistical methodologies like t-tests, f-tests, ANOVA to really measure, is there really a statistical difference between these two groups? Did the people that got the email, did they respond that much better than the people that didn't? And this is really important in decision making and optimization. So again, as I mentioned, some companies don't have the ability to do this. One of the reasons could be that maybe you don't have a huge email list. Maybe your list of customers is only a few hundred. That might not be big enough to do test and control or design of experiment. But let's say that you had thousands. Well, yeah, you definitely could do it that way. But even if you don't have the ability to do this, there are ways to have pseudo control groups. There's a lot of different statistical methodologies that will help you to not have a pure test control group, but still statistically measure the difference between the two groups. So what do I mean by a pseudo control group? A pseudo control group could be, let's say that these people ended up getting an offer. This other group didn't. They, maybe aren't exactly the same group, but they're very similar. Or we had a, something that's common in retail is that you could say we're doing a mass marketing campaign like radio, and we're doing it in a market like Boston. there's a similar market, Chicago, let's say, that doesn't get that radio campaign. Let's compare and see how Boston did versus Chicago. And let's take into account kind of what the trend was before we had this radio campaign. So you could kind of estimate what would, our sales be like in the Chicago market, going into this campaign had we done it. And then what is it in Boston? Let's compare the two. So that's what I mean by a pseudo control group. It's not ideal, but there's definitely nothing wrong with that. Now we're going to go into the final tier of analytics, and that is predictive analytics. And this is one of the key topics that you hear about today. I think when people think of data science, when people think of analytics, this is probably the thing that's at the forefront that people really think about is, building models that, predict what somebody's going to do. So this is important. Again, this is kind of taking it to the next level. You really have to have a solid foundation of those other three levels that I had mentioned before you get to this. Your data is really important. It's important to see what's going on from a general sense using visualization or reports before you start worrying about building predictive models or, using machine learning. You really need to have that solid foundation. But once you do, and you could get to the next level and get to this last tier, there is so much that you can do, and there's so much out there. The best part, again, is that using programs like R, Python, whatever, it's all free. So you could build fantastic models that are very predictive. And some of the examples that I'm going to show here, a propensity model is a very common one. So what is the likelihood of somebody to respond to a campaign, for example? So let's say that we have a customer base of 3,000 people. Well, maybe we don't want to send an offer to all of them. Maybe we want to send an offer to only 500 of them, or the best ones. And this is huge from when you're looking at it from a profit standpoint, from a cost standpoint. You don't want to give an offer to everybody. Well, we could build a predictive model that says, okay, well, these people are the most likely to respond to our campaign, or they're the most likely to be profitable or buy a certain product or whatever. And what's huge about that is that we could build this predictive model, look and see what the likelihood is of somebody to actually respond. And then we're going to go after the cream of the crop. We're going to go after the best customers. You could do this for digital ads, which is another one. Like I was talking about with purchasing a product, giving incremental sales, which is huge. Somebody attriting. There's just so much that you could do. And these predictive models are used all over the place, whether you know it or not. When you go on to anything like Amazon, when you're clicking on any web page and you're seeing ads pop up, there are predictive models behind that. People use predictive models for campaigns. You could see Obama's campaign back in 2012. They put a ton of analytics behind all these different areas to see what the likelihood would be. Put a lot of data science behind that. So predictive models are used everywhere nowadays. One of the other key things is segmentation, and this kind of goes hand in hand with predictive models too. You could use predictive models to identify what some of the key variables are that you want to segment on. And this is huge. A lot of people will take data, and you've got all these different fields, and you've got information about your customers or whatever. And then they say, okay, well, let's just start putting this together and creating clusters of people that look similar. Well, you could do that, but one of the other key things for segmentation, and this is something that we focus on, New Market Revolution, within our mastermind, we talk a lot about how to segment on the most important variables and how to really narrow down your customer and narrow down your focus. This is really key. There really is an art to this. It is science, but a lot of this is art of, what kind of methodologies can you use to identify what those key variables are that are really driving your response, that are really, bringing incremental sales. And then using, statistical methodologies like k-means, cluster analysis to put this together. There's things, one of the methodologies that we use, which we like to call the marble method, is starting from a broad standpoint of design of experiment, of randomly sending out different offers, different creatives, different channels, and then kind of casting with a wide net. And just like how somebody would chisel a statue out of marble, is that you're starting with this giant piece of block and then chiseling away until you really get to this. And that's what we really teach, is that if you have the ability to do this, is that you cast with a broad net and then start to narrow it down and try to identify who are these key segments that are really driving my business. How do I tailor my marketing strategies, focus our branding to really speak to these individual customers? And one of the other things here that's kind of key, that I'm sure everybody's heard about when it comes to predictive analytics, is forecasting. This is huge. There are a lot of models. There's simple models like regression models, for example, that'll help you trend in a linear fashion and say, okay, this is kind of generally speaking how we're trending. Linear regression is important. It's used a lot, but there are a lot more involved methodologies like ARIMA models, which stands for autoregressive integrated moving average models, which it's a lot to say, but what it basically means is you're forecasting, but it takes into account seasonal patterns. So let's say, for example, during the holiday season, there's a big spike consistently every year. Well, your time series model takes that into account, and you could predict your sales going forward or whatever metrics. But it's also good from a measurement standpoint, because if you're having a mass campaign, let's say that we're not able to have a test or control group, or we're doing mass marketing like radio or TV, something like that, across the nation. You could say, okay, well, how were we trending before we launched that campaign? And based off of that, let's come up with a prediction and see what we would have looked like had we not done this massive campaign. You can look at the difference between the two, and that basically tells you what your incremental is. It tells you how successful your campaign actually is. So there are really cool things that you could do with this all in R. Finally, one of the big things that I'm sure everybody's heard about nowadays is machine learning. So I think one of the best examples of this is Amazon. Amazon puts a huge focus on machine learning, where you're using statistical algorithms. Generally they're not that complex, but to do things like to say, hey, Dave, here's an item that you may like based on your past shopping behavior. And it's all done, through the back end. It's not really a hands-on thing that a person is deciding. It's constantly learning and saying, okay, based on my shopping pattern, what's the item that he's most likely to buy? Let's show it to him. It's iterative, and it's always kind of growing and feeding data into it. So this is really a key thing that a lot of people are doing nowadays. It's huge for offer optimization, is determining what type of offer is somebody most likely to make a purchase with. So things like that. And I think that really it's what we're looking at today with machine learning is it's not very complex algorithms, but it's really just scratching the surface right now. What we're going to see in the next 5-10 years is machine learning is really going to be driving a lot of businesses, along with everything else. What can data science do for you? To kind of sum up everything that we're talking about here, data science is so important. It's really, if you're not using data to drive your decisions in your business, you're flying blind. It's something that can really help you in efficiency, with optimization, with just understanding what your business is doing. It's key to that. And again, once you could really start bringing in a lot of data and using it, with statistical methodologies, simple querying, simple data manipulation, to really understand who your customers are. And once you could do that, and you could start tailoring your messages to them, and you could start, coming up with targeted campaigns, you're going to see, a world of difference in what you're doing. And really, it's imperative with any kind of business nowadays is that you have to do this. Nobody is doing broad general campaigns anymore. Everything is targeted to try to get down to an individual level. It's key for determining your marketing strategy, what your products are, what your prices are, your messaging. This is really what data science is, and this is so key to any kind of business, is to really add this to it. A little bit about us, about New Market Revolution. What can we do for you? So one of the, we've got three things we really focus on as far as data science, as far as analytics, is that we're here to help you build your data science team. So if you don't have a data science team, if you don't really have data, how do we do it from the ground up? That's what we're here for, is to help you build that. If you already have a data science team, how do you improve it? How do you go to the next level? Maybe you have some good databases already. Are you really pulling in the data the right way? Maybe if you are, let's go to the next level of, how do we really start bringing this in from a visualization standpoint, from a reporting standpoint, ultimately then from a predictive analytics standpoint, how do you use that data to really help drive your business? Because again, data is, they say it's the oil of the 21st century. And it really is just, there's no limit to what you could do with, if you've got good data coming in, if you've got it organized, good quality, you've got a lot of it, there's so much that you could do with it. So the mastermind group that we have set up, if you become a member, we do this. We, talk about this stuff within our group, have classes every month where we talk about topics, that people really want to hear about, to, again, help you build and grow. Now, one other thing that we do too is that if you don't have a data science team, and you really don't have the resources to hire somebody full-time for that, well, we could do that for you. So we could essentially become your data science team. And if you're interested in that, please just, shoot us an email, let us know. We could talk and figure out what your needs are, and try to help you out with that support. So, and, along with that, we've got hourly, monthly, annual, fixed plans. We'll work something out with you. One thing, again, as far as the membership in our mastermind group is huge. There's so much to learn. There's so much that we could help you with, sitting down one-on-one, going over this, being able to talk out your problems with other people, to say, hey, look, here are some of the challenges that we're having with our business. What can we do? What type of methodologies can we use to really, help drive our business or utilize our data? And that's what we're there for, is to kind of work hand in hand with this within our group, to be going over specific topics and showing, how do you do this in R? What is the type of code that I would need to do something like this in SQL? With Python, I want to start to understand what our customers are really thinking about us. What type of methodologies can we use with that? That's one of the key things that we do. And so one thing that we're going to do for, everybody that's part of this webinar today, again, I really appreciate everyone, joining us today. So if you could sign up in the next 4 hours, we are going to give you $500 off your annual membership. This is for a limited time, but again, it's, really, it's not that big of an investment when you think about how much you could really bring to your business, when you really could understand data science, how you could really utilize it and bring it into your business. So you could just, click on the link we have here. The next 4 hours, go through PayPal, just put in your email address there. And when you purchase this, what we'll do is we'll set you up. I'll send out an email, giving you the next steps of how to really get into the community, the mastermind, more details about what we're doing. But this is really a good opportunity, and especially, $500 off really makes it a lot easier to do. It's an annual membership, and it's really, it's a great group. There's a lot of stuff that we could talk about, and it's all up to you. Once you're part of the group, you could really start driving, what the discussions are, and what we want to learn. And just one last thing. If anybody has any thoughts on this webinar that I did today, I'd really appreciate it. The more feedback that I get in doing these, the better it is going forward. I could, really focus on things that people are interested in. So please just let me know if you want to just put it in the chat window really quick. Just some quick feedback. What did you think? Was it good? Was it bad? Were there things that I didn't cover? Please let me know so that I can improve this. So now I'm going to open this up, for the next half hour, whatever. Ask me any questions that you want, just in general about data science, about, kind of what we do, anything like that, just ask away. And again, we'll be here all night.